In the darkest corners of the galaxy, where morality goes to die and credits flow like synthetic wine at a diplomat's funeral, there existed a market for the most intimate commodity imaginable: memory. Not just any memories. Mind you, the galactic elite had grown bored with their own millennia-long lifespans and perfect recall. They craved the raw, unfiltered experiences of primitive species. Those delightfully chaotic beings who lived short, brutish lives filled with genuine emotion and authentic stupidity. The Zephyrian Syndicate had cornered this market with the efficiency of a well-oiled bureaucracy and the moral flexibility of a career politician. Their crystalline headquarters floated in the void between star systems, a testament to their success in trafficking the one thing that supposedly couldn't be stolen: consciousness itself. The irony wasn't lost on them. Beings who had evolved beyond physical form were paying top dollar to experience what it felt like to stub a toe or fall in love with the wrong person. Cathara, the Syndicate's lead extraction specialist, prided herself on surgical precision. Her elongated skull housed a brain that processed information at speeds that would make quantum computers weep with envy, and her forearms moved with the grace of a conductor leading a symphony of neural violation. She'd extracted memories from over 3,000 species, each one catalogued and priced according to their emotional complexity and rarity. The Vraxians' memories of their mating rituals fetched premium prices, while the Dulgoths' experiences of their religious ceremonies were considered bargain bin material. Today's target should have been routine: a single human female, isolated on a research station orbiting a dead star. Humans were Category 7 on the Syndicate scale, barely sentient, emotionally volatile, and refreshingly naive about the universe's true nature. Their memories sold well to clients who enjoyed the novelty of experiencing life through the lens of a species that somehow believed in things like hope and justice, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. The woman worked alone in Laboratory Complex Theta 7, surrounded by quantum field generators that hummed with the kind of energy that made space-time hiccup. Her daily routine was mind-numbingly predictable: wake up, consume liquid stimulants, stare at equations that would have challenged a Zephyrian child, then reperfect target material, isolated, unguarded, and blissfully unaware that her species had been classified as harvestable by 17 different galactic criminal organizations. The extraction team materialized in her quarters while she slept, their cloaking fields shimmering like heat mirage. Standard procedure: neural probe insertion, memory siphoning, selective editing to remove evidence of the encounter and departure. The whole operation should have taken 20 minutes, tops. Cathara had done this dance so many times she could perform it while calculating tax return. But human minds, it turned out, were special in ways that defied every xenobiological classification system in the galaxy. The moment the neural probe made contact with the woman's consciousness, Cathara's sophisticated extraction equipment began having what could only be described as a mechanical seizure. Warning lights flashed like a disco ball at a funeral, and the memory streams that should have flowed in orderly, categorized channels instead exploded in every direction like a burst pipe in a philosophy factory. Human consciousness wasn't organized like other species. Where Zephyrians maintained neat, hierarchical memory structures, humans apparently stored everything in a chaotic web of associations, emotions, and random song lyrics. Trying to extract specific memories was like attempting to untangle a quantum knot while riding a roller coaster during an earthquake. The extraction device, overwhelmed by the sheer disorder of human thought, began downloading everything it encountered. Childhood memories mixed with advanced quantum mechanics, which somehow connected to embarrassing moments from adolescence, which inexplicably linked to profound insights about the nature of reality. The woman's consciousness was simultaneously brilliant and ridiculous, profound and petty, organized and absolutely insane. In the chaos, something unprecedented happened. The data flow reversed. Instead of just taking, the system began Zephyrian tactical protocols, classified Syndicate operational procedures, and entire databases of galactic criminal networks suddenly found themselves being uploaded into the human's neural pathway. The extraction team's own memories began bleeding into the data stream, creating a feedback loop that no amount of advanced technology could prevent. The woman's eyes snapped open just as the emergency shutdown engaged, and for a brief moment, Cathara found herself staring into the gaze of something that shouldn't have been possible, a human who now carried fragments of one of the galaxy's most sophisticated criminal minds. The extraction team vanished as quickly as they'd arrived, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and a woman who woke up with the mother of all headaches, and the distinct feeling that she'd just learned something very important about the universe, though she couldn't quite remember what. As she stumbled to her feet, rubbing her temples, she found herself thinking in mathematical concepts that hadn't existed in human language 5 minutes ago. She also found herself inexplicably aware of 17 different ways to disable a Zephyrian security system, the current exchange rate for stolen memories on the black market, and the rather embarrassing fact that the galaxy's most feared criminal organization was apparently run by beings who collected antique furniture as a hobby. The syndicate had indeed stolen her mind. They just hadn't expected her to steal theirs in return. The human woman spent the next 3 days convinced she was having the most elaborate nervous breakdown in the history of psychological disorders. One moment she'd be calculating quantum field fluctuations. The next she'd find herself mentally composing tactical assessments in a language that technically didn't exist, but somehow made perfect sense. It was like having a particularly annoying roommate move into her brain, one who spoke in military jargon and had strong opinions about proper infiltration techniques. By the 4th day, she'd accepted that either she'd gone completely insane or something genuinely bizarre had happened to her. Given that she was a quantum physicist who regularly dealt with particles that existed in multiple states simultaneously, insanity seemed like the less complicated option. Unfortunately, the evidence pointed toward the latter. The breakthrough came when she absent-mindedly muttered what she thought was gibberish while reviewing her research notes. The laboratory's translation matrix, a piece of standard-issue alien technology that every human research station received as part of their cultural exchange program, suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree and began displaying text in 17 different languages. What she'd spoken wasn't gibberish at all. It was fluent Zephyrian high command dialect, complete with proper honorifics and tactical terminology. The translation matrix, bless its literal artificial soul, helpfully provided context. She'd just critiqued the structural integrity of the research station's defensive systems and suggested 3 different ways to improve them. More disturbingly, she'd done so with the casual expertise of someone who'd spent centuries analyzing fortified positions for weaknesses. That's when the real education began. The fragments of alien knowledge in her head weren't random. They were comprehensive, interconnected, and absolutely damning. She found herself understanding not just the Zephyrian language, but their entire cultural framework. Their society was built on rigid hierarchies, technological superiority, and the firm belief that intelligence could be measured by how closely one resembled a Zephyr. It was like discovering that the universe's most successful criminal organization was run by cosmic snobs, who judged other species the way wine critics judged box wine. The memory fragments revealed something even more insulting. Humans weren't just considered primitive. They were classified as a durably backward. The galactic community viewed humanity the way humans viewed particularly clever dolphins. Impressive for their limited capabilities, but ultimately just smart animals playing with tools they didn't truly understand. Earth was essentially a nature preserve, and humans were the amusing wildlife that occasionally did something unexpectedly clever. This revelation came with a side order of cosmic irony that would have been hilarious if it weren't so infuriating. The same species that had developed faster than light travel, quantum computing, and neural extraction technology apparently couldn't grasp the concept of human unpredictability. They'd studied humanity for decades, cataloged their behaviors, and filed them under chaotic but managed. It was like being underestimated by a computer that had never heard of chaos theory. The woman's understanding of galactic politics expanded with each passing hour. She learned about the Confederation of Evolved Minds, the governing body that sounded impressively democratic until you realized it was essentially a club for species that had achieved technological enlightenment and looked down on everyone else. Humans weren't members, of course. They were barely acknowledged as existing, listed somewhere between promising but primitive and potentially dangerous if left unsupervised. The communication protocols embedded in her mind proved particularly useful. She discovered that the research station's cultural exchange equipment wasn't just for translation. It was connected to a galaxy-wide network that monitored developing species. Every human transmission, every scientific breakthrough, every cultural development was being cataloged and analyzed by beings who treated humanity like a fascinating case study in organized chaos. Her first attempt at actual communication with the galactic community was a masterpiece of calculated deception. Using the station's quantum communication array, she sent a message that appeared to be a standard distress signal, lost researcher, equipment malfunction, requesting assistance. In reality, it was a carefully crafted probe designed to test the response protocols of 3 different alien species, while simultaneously gathering intelligence on their communication networks. The responses were revealing in their condescension. The Altalian Trade Federation offered to sell her replacement equipment at primitive species discount rates. The vegan collective suggested she might be happier pursuing more appropriate research topics, like agriculture or basic mathematics. The Zephyrian syndicate, operating under the cover of a legitimate salvage operation, politely inquired about her recent difficulties and offered to help with any memory-related issues she might be experiencing. It was that last message that confirmed what she'd begun to suspect. The botched extraction hadn't been a one-time operation. The syndicate had been systematically harvesting human memories for years, and they were concerned that their latest target might remember more than she should. Their offer of help was actually a thinly veiled threat wrapped in diplomatic language. The woman found herself laughing, a sound that echoed strangely in the empty laboratory. They were worried about her. These beings, who considered themselves the pinnacle of galactic evolution, were concerned that one primitive human might have learned something inconvenient. It was like watching a group of adults panic because a toddler had wandered into their secret meeting. She spent the next week pretending to be a confused and frightened victim, while actually learning everything she could about the networks that had been monitoring and exploiting humanity. Each conversation revealed new layers of galactic arrogance, new assumptions about human limitations, and new opportunities for exploitation. The plan that began forming in her mind was audacious to the point of madness. These aliens had stolen her memories, violated her mind, and treated her species like interesting specimens in a cosmic zoo. They'd made one crucial mistake, though. They'd assumed that humans would react predictably to being victimized. They were about to learn that humans had a particular talent for turning their supposed weaknesses into devastating strengths. If they wanted to see how a primitive species handled betrayal, she'd be happy to provide a demonstration. After all, they'd given her the tools to do it. The woman's transformation from victim to predator began with something appropriately human: spite. Pure, concentrated spite, mixed with the kind of methodical planning that comes from having someone else's military tactical database rattling around in your head. If the galaxy wanted to treat humanity like amusing pets, she'd show them exactly how dangerous a pet could be when it learned to pick locks. Her first target was the Zephyrian Syndicate's recruitment network. The memory fragments had revealed something deliciously ironic. For all their claims of superiority, the Syndicate relied heavily on intermediaries from lesser species to handle their dirty work. Apparently, even cosmic crime lords needed local contacts who could blend in with the primitive populations they were exploiting. The woman crafted 3 separate identities, each tailored to exploit different aspects of galactic prejudice. To the Altarian Trade Federation, she was a desperate human scientist willing to sell research data for credits. To the vegan collective, she presented herself as an enlightened human seeking to elevate her species through proper guidance. To the Zephyrian Syndicate, she was exactly what they expected: a traumatized victim with valuable knowledge and conveniently fragmented memories. The beauty of her approach lay in its simplicity. She didn't try to hide her humanity. She weaponized the galaxy's expectations of what humans were supposed to be. When she displayed knowledge that should have been beyond her species' capabilities, she attributed it to lucky guesses and intuitive leaps. When she demonstrated tactical thinking that would have impressed a Zephyrian general, she framed it as human creativity and thinking outside the box. Her first real infiltration began when she responded to a syndicate recruitment message disguised as a research grant opportunity. The position was perfect: a cultural liaison role that would allow her to observe primitive species interactions while providing valuable intelligence to legitimate research organizations. It was like being invited to spy on yourself while the criminals watched and took note. The interview process was conducted through quantum encrypted channels, with her prospective employers maintaining the fiction that they were respectable academics. The woman played her part perfectly, displaying just enough knowledge to be useful while maintaining the appropriate level of naive enthusiasm expected from a human. She even threw in some genuine scientific curiosity about alien cultures, which her handlers found charmingly primitive. What they didn't realize was that every question they asked revealed more about their operations than her answers revealed about her. Their inquiries about human memory patterns, consciousness structures, and psychological vulnerabilities painted a clear picture of an organization that had been systematically exploiting her species for years. They were particularly interested in humans who worked in isolation, had access to advanced technology, and displayed above-average intelligence, exactly the profile of someone whose memories would fetch premium prices in the galactic black market. The woman's new role granted her access to the syndicate's communication networks, operational databases, and most importantly, their client lists. What she discovered was a web of criminal activity that spanned dozens of star systems and involved species she'd never heard of. The memory trade was just one branch of a vast organization that dealt in everything from consciousness trafficking to cultural manipulation. The scope of the operation was staggering. The syndicate had agents embedded in research institutions, trade delegations, and even some government agencies across the galaxy. They'd been systematically cataloging and exploiting primitive species for centuries, always staying just below the threshold that would attract serious attention from galactic authorities. It was organized crime on a cosmic scale, managed with the efficiency of a corporate empire. Her position as a cultural liaison gave her the perfect cover to begin her real work. She started by identifying weak points in their security protocols, mapping their communication channels, and cataloging their operational procedures. The Zephyrian tactical knowledge in her head proved invaluable. She could analyze their defenses with the expertise of someone who'd spent lifetimes studying similar systems. The woman's approach to sabotage was distinctly human in its creativity. Instead of launching direct attacks, she began introducing chaos into their operations through seemingly innocent action. She provided slightly incorrect translations during cultural exchanges, created minor communication delays that disrupted timing-sensitive operations, and offered suggestions that seemed helpful but actually compromised their security. Her masterpiece was a series of cultural reports that painted humanity as far more dangerous than anyone had realized. She documented human unpredictability, their tendency toward violent solutions when cornered, and their disturbing habit of turning disadvantages into weapons. She framed these observations as academic curiosity, wondering aloud why such a primitive species had developed such sophisticated warfare capabilities. The reports had exactly the effect she'd hoped for. The syndicate's human operations became increasingly cautious. Their extraction team started requesting additional backup, and their handlers began treating human targets with the kind of nervous respect usually reserved for unstable explosives. They were beginning to realize that maybe humanity wasn't as harmless as they'd assumed. While sowing confusion in the syndicate's ranks, the woman was simultaneously building her own network. She identified other victims of memory extraction beings from various species who'd been targeted by the organization. Most had no idea what had happened to them, but they all shared certain symptoms, gaps in their memories, knowledge they couldn't explain, and a vague sense that something fundamental had been taken from them. The woman began reaching out to these victims, using the syndicate's own communication channels, to coordinate what appeared to be a support group for beings suffering from consciousness disorders. In reality, she was assembling an army of allies who had every reason to want revenge against the organization that had violated their minds. Her greatest triumph came when she managed to access the syndicate's central database during a routine cultural consultation session. The files contained detailed records of every operation they'd conducted, every victim they'd targeted, and every client they'd served. It was a comprehensive record of cosmic-scale criminal activity, documented with the kind of meticulous detail that would make prosecutors across the galaxy weep with joy. But the woman wasn't interested in justice. She was interested in irony. The syndicate had built their empire on the assumption that primitive species were too simple to understand what was happening to them, too disorganized to mount effective resistance, and too limited in their thinking to pose a real threat. They were about to learn that humans had a particular talent for proving assumptions wrong, usually in the most spectacularly inconvenient way possible. The trap she'd been setting was nearly ready to spring, and when it did, the galaxy would discover that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one everyone mistakes for prey. The woman smiled as she reviewed her work, surrounded by the alien technology that had once been used to violate her mind. The syndicate had stolen her memories, but in doing so, they'd given her something far more valuable, the knowledge and motivation to destroy them completely. After all, they'd taught her that in the galaxy's criminal underworld, the most successful predators were the ones no one saw coming. The woman's grand finale began with something that would have made her species proud. A perfectly timed double cross delivered with the kind of theatrical flair that only humans seem to appreciate. She'd spent months positioning herself as the syndicate's most valuable cultural consultant, the one human who truly understood the delicate art of managing primitive species. They trusted her completely, which was their first mistake. Their second mistake was assuming she thought like them. The revelation came during what the syndicate believed was a routine operational briefing. The woman had requested a meeting with the senior leadership to discuss concerning developments in human behavioral patterns. They gathered in their crystalline conference chamber, floating in the void like cosmic judges preparing to pass sentence on yet another inferior species. What they got instead was a masterclass in human psychological warfare. She began by presenting her findings about humanity's alarming tendency toward revenge-seeking behavior. Her report documented case after case of humans who'd responded to perceived injustices with increasingly creative forms of retaliation. She showed them historical examples of humans who dedicated their entire lives to destroying organizations that had wronged them, often using methods that their targets never saw coming. The syndicate leadership listened with growing unease as she painted a picture of humanity as a species that held grudges like other beings held breathing patterns, automatically, persistently, and with disturbing dedication. She explained that humans had an unfortunate habit of treating personal violations as existential threats, leading to responses that were completely disproportionate to the original offense. Then she smiled and activated every recording device, communication channel and data transmission system in the syndicate's network simultaneously. The galaxy's most sophisticated criminal organization discovered that they'd been broadcasting their most sensitive operations to every law enforcement agency, regulatory body and government intelligence service within 50 light years. The woman had turned their own communication network into a confession booth, complete with detailed records of every crime they'd committed over the past century. But that was just the opening act. The real show began when the woman revealed that she'd been systematically corrupting their operational databases for months. Every extraction protocol had been subtly modified to include feedback loops that would scramble the neural patterns of anyone attempting to use them. Every security system had been reprogrammed to identify syndicate agents as potential threats. Every safehouse location had been quietly shared with the victims' families, local authorities, and in some cases rival criminal organizations. The syndicate's carefully constructed empire began collapsing in real time as their own systems turned against them. Extraction teams found themselves trapped in their own equipment. Communication networks started broadcasting embarrassing personal messages to the wrong recipient. Financial accounts began automatically transferring funds to victim compensation programs across the galaxy. The woman's network of fellow victims activated simultaneously, each one armed with detailed intelligence about syndicate operations in their respective system. What had appeared to be a support group for consciousness disorders was actually a galaxy-spanning intelligence network that had been documenting and preparing to expose the syndicate's activities for months. The psychological impact was perhaps more devastating than the operational damage. The syndicate's leadership found themselves facing the incomprehensible reality that they'd been outmaneuvered by beings they considered barely sentient. Their entire worldview was built on the assumption that intelligence correlated with technological advancement, that superior beings naturally dominated inferior ones, and that criminal organizations succeeded through sophisticated planning and execution. Instead, they'd been destroyed by something they'd never accounted for: human spite, armed with insider knowledge and an unlimited capacity for creative problem solving. The woman's coup de grace came when she broadcast a message to the galaxy's criminal underground, delivered in perfect Zephyrian high command dialect but with a distinctly human accent. She announced that the syndicate's territories, assets and client lists were now available to anyone bold enough to take them. It was an invitation to a feeding frenzy, delivered with the casual tone of someone announcing a garage sale. The response was immediate and brutal. Criminal organizations across the galaxy descended on the syndicate's resources like scavengers on a fresh corpse. The woman had essentially declared open season on the galaxy's most feared crime syndicate, turning their own reputation for ruthless efficiency into a target painted on their collective back. Within hours, The Confederation of Evolved Minds issued an emergency decree reclassifying humanity from primitive but harmless to potentially dangerous if provoked. The revision included a strongly worded recommendation that member species avoid antagonizing humans unless they were prepared to deal with the consequences. The woman's personal favorite development was the flood of academic papers that began appearing in Xenoph Psychology Journal. Titles like Reevaluating Human Cognitive Capabilities, A Case Study in Strategic Deception, and the correlation between perceived primitiveness and actual tactical sophistication began dominating scholarly discourse. She'd accidentally triggered a galaxy-wide academic reassessment of human intelligence, complete with embarrassed revisions to textbooks and curriculum updates. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was the message she received from the Altarian Trade Federation, formally inviting humanity to join their merchant guild as full partners rather than protected species. The invitation came with a hastily appended note explaining that they'd always respected human potential and had never intended to suggest otherwise. The woman spent her final days at the research station fielding communication requests from across the galaxy. Academic institutions wanted to study human strategic thinking. Government agencies requested consultations on human behavioral patterns. Criminal organizations offered her employment with compensation packages that would have made ancient kings weep with envy. She declined them all, choosing instead to return to her quantum physics research with one significant addition: a new understanding of how consciousness could be weaponized against those who underestimate it. Her work took on new dimensions as she explored the intersection of human creativity and galactic technology, developing theories that would eventually revolutionize the field of applied consciousness studies. The research station's quantum communication array buzzed constantly with messages from other humans across the galaxy, scientists, explorers, and researchers who'd suddenly found themselves being treated with a level of respect that bordered on nervous deference. The woman had inadvertently changed humanity's status from cosmic curiosity to galactic player, all because she'd refused to accept being victimized quietly. Years later, when Xenoph psychology students studied the fall of the Zephyrian syndicate, they would marvel at the elegant simplicity of the human woman's strategy. She'd turned the criminals' own assumptions about superiority into the weapons that destroyed them, proving that the most dangerous opponent was often the one everyone dismissed as harmless. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of underestimating species based on technological development rather than creative potential. They discovered that intelligence took many forms, and that sometimes the most sophisticated minds belonged to beings who still believed in concepts like justice, revenge, and the fundamental importance of proving people wrong. The woman's story became a cautionary tale whispered in criminal organizations across the galaxy. Be very careful when you steal someone's mind, because you might accidentally give them the tools to steal your entire world in return. It was a lesson the galaxy would not soon forget, delivered by a species that had turned being underestimated into their greatest strategic advantage. After all, as the woman had proven, sometimes the most primitive response to sophisticated oppression was also the most effective one.